I just wanted to say I'm wearing my uniform. I always wore a tie to school every single day. I don't know if you remember that for those who were our students that way, but I always wore a tie because I always said that you always dress up for special occasions and very special events. And for me, school time was a very special time to be with all of you. So I always wore my tie and sometimes my jacket to school all during the entire school year. In fact, I remember during shop class, I sawed one of my ties right off. So it took a little beating that way, but I had a special shop class for all the students at one particular time. So why don't I go into the slides and I'll just kind of start off by how we got out to the island in the first place and all of that. Let's see, because I think this may be a burden to me, but I'll try to, do I push Jen share screen now?
Yes, you do.
And then there. And then how about play? Okay, so okay, I'm seeing a picture of the island here, and I'm seeing a picture that says this meeting is being recorded. You want me to leave that there?
You can click OK. There's a box that says OK or got it.
Got it. Gotcha. Mandy, thank you so much. Okay, so we're good to go. So again, this is the 50th anniversary of our first coming to the island. And in fact, ironically, I think we interviewed for the job, not quite in February by any means, but I think I interviewed for this job in around April of 1973. But in any event, it goes back to, of course, Ruth and I were students at the Divinity School at the University of Edinburgh. I was a 3-year student taking a Master's of Divinity degree, and Ruth just came over for 1 year. She was very interested in theology, divinity, New Testament, Old Testament. So she came for a full year, but it was during my 2nd year at Edinburgh. And we fell in love and we decided to get married. And we were married in July of 1973. We were married in the Little Children's Chapel there in Camden Rockport area. But in any event, about a month later, we would start as the teachers of the school. We were hired not as the ministers and teachers, but as the teachers of the school. We had said to the school board, and I think it was Ricky Bermer, Alta Ashley, maybe Sandy Dixon. I can't quite remember who the school board was, but in any event, they interviewed us and they hired us as the co-teachers, not just Ruth as the teacher, but we were both co-teachers. We only got one salary, but we did it all together. We were not hired as the ministers. That was kind of in the side because the person we learned about the job from was a man named the Reverend Stanley Haskell. Stan Haskell was the boat minister on the Sunbeam. And he was good friends with Ruth. And she had always told them that she always wanted to teach in a one-room schoolhouse on some island. Well, when Stan heard about this job opening up, he encouraged her to kind of apply for it because actually we were headed to Nova Scotia. We were thinking about going to Nova Scotia and working there. But Stan kind of persuaded us and said, look, before you go to Nova Scotia, you should consider going to a stepping stone toward Nova Scotia. It's a stone called Monhegan Island. And so we did look into it and it seemed appropriate. Again, we interviewed for the job and we were hired as the school teachers, but not as the ministers. That came about because the first day we were there on the island, Frida Stanley, bless her heart, Sherm Stanley's mother, who was the head of the church at that time, had heard that I had a divinity degree. So she came to our house and she said, I'm in charge of the church. And we hear that you're a minister. I said, well, I'm not a minister. I said, I have a divinity degree, but I'm not a minister. I wasn't interested in going into parish ministry in any way. But in any event, she said, well, you have a divinity degree. Why don't you become the minister of the church? I said, well, before you get going too quickly on this, you better try me out. And if you like me, then maybe I'll do it. If you don't, no hard feelings, that will be fine. So she said, okay, we'll try you out. Sunday was, I think, 2 or 3 days away. So why don't you start taking the church service this Sunday? So I did. And I knew I was on trial with, again, Frida. So at the church service, which was, as usual, an evening church service at 7 o'clock, in came Frida. She sat right in the front row. And her father was there too, Charlie Murphy. I'm not sure how many of you remember Charlie Murphy. Everyone called him Gramps Murphy, but that was Frida's father. So they both came in together, sat in the front row. And then just before the service started, I remember Charlie Murphy turning to Frida and saying, Frida, I forgot my hearing aids. I can't hear anything. So I knew I'd have to kind of speak a little more loudly than usual. And indeed, we had the service. And at the end of the service, Frida came up to me, she said, you did a very good job. You'll do. That was it. And next thing I knew, I was the minister, quote unquote, of the Monhegan church. So we started again as the ministers of the little village church there, and certainly as the school teachers. Let me see, it's not working here. I'm trying to turn to the next slide there, Jen, but it's not activating.
So are you able to press the arrows at the bottom of your keyboard?
That's what I'm pushing.
Okay.
So it's just beeping to me.
What about the forward button? So at the very top of your keyboard, hit the forward button there. You can see like a play and a, I don't know if that will work. Let's try it. No?
Let me see here. We may have to go turn it. Phyllis, can you take a look here? I have my expert here, but we're going to be struggling together here.
This is the very thing that happened to me at the last program at trivia.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Oh, I think there we go. Okay, I see what I'm doing. Okay, we'll give it a go again. So we became we started around August of 1973, and it was just a wonderful event. There's our lovely little schoolhouse, and here's, of course, the church as it looked back in 1973. You'll notice the wonderful oak lath traps rather than wire traps there, but that was the picture I took on the first week I was there. Okay, so there's our students. There you all are, for those of you who remember. Sorry, it's a very poor picture, but it was the one I had. So again, for those of you who are not familiar with these people, but from left to right, starting at the very bottom is Zoe. And then I think there's Kathy Winkapaw. And I think the 3 Rollins boys are behind them. I see Chris and again, Jeff and Greg. Timmy Burmer, of course, right there next to Ruth. And I think Donna Cundy's there on the far right in the doorway. And Lisa Dixon, Tinker or Kelly Cundy, and Louisa Burmer, kind of with a hidden face there. And of course, Courtney right there with the big pumpkin. So those are they're not everyone, because Chris Burmer isn't there. I don't know, Chris, where you were. You might have been fooling around somewhere. But in any event, there we all are. So those are most of the school children. I don't see Lance there. In any event, we'll move on. So when we arrived there, this was the house that was, we were told that we could use as the teacherage or whatever it was for the school teachers. So this is the Bessie Green house. It was such a fantastic house right near the lighthouse, of course. But it did have a few drawbacks and deficits. Of course, there was no electricity. No one had electricity except for the few generators on the island at that particular time. We had, of course, kerosene lamps and Rayo lamps and Aladdin lamps, and that was fine. Another difficulty was, of course, no running water. But again, no problem. We used to use the well at Oscar and Clara Burton's house. Remember, it was just kind of below their house there. So I would every Saturday draw about 125 gallons of water. I had 2 garbage cans, and I filled one that was 50 gallons and one that was 75 gallons. And every Saturday, I would go up the hill and get two these gallon jugs of water and fill 125 gallons worth, and that would do us. But of course, Ruth always baked chocolate chip cookies on Saturday. And many of the children would come and help us. And for any water they brought down, they got a chocolate chip cookie. So it was bribery right from the very start. In any event, we also, I must say, we, even though we lived on 125 gallons a week, bless their hearts, the Burmer family would often have us down on Friday nights for supper, always preceded by a bath. So we got a hot bath at the Burmer's household. We only got one bath. So whoever was dirtiest had to take the bath after one another. So usually Ruth went first and I went second. So that's how we kind of arranged our Fridays. The other deficit about this house, which looks so magnificent, of course, is that it really doesn't have any insulation in it. I'm not sure how Bessie Green did it, but anyway, it was not really very well insulated. So we were usually pretty chilly. We always thought that if we could get the house up to about, in the wintertime, about 55 to 60 degrees, we were really doing well. And indeed, that's how Ruth lived pretty much the entire from about November until the end of March. She would come right home, wrap herself in that quilt, put a stocking cap on, and always put her feet in the oven. So that was the only place she could get her feet warm. So it was a little bit rough in terms of the weather and the conditions that way. That, of course, has two sleeve burners, those little wick burners there, that was the sole source of heat for us. So we were kind of in the bedroom off to the left there, and then this little kitchen area, and that's how we lived for the entire time. Now, once again, it wasn't as if we always were there, because when anyone often went away, they always had kind of compassion on us, and they invited us to take their houses. For example, I think Rusty and Ann Court went to Bermuda I think for about 3 weeks. So they said, take our house and get warmed up. So we took Rusty and Ann's house, and I remember Craig and Judy Sproul went away somewhere. So we took their house for about 3 weeks. And Ernest and Wilma Lewis also, of course, went to Sanibel Island. And one winter we stayed there for, I think, 3 months there in their house. So that was real luxury living. But basically, this is where we stayed. So here we are. There's the familiar group of individuals, at least 4 of them. Courtney Day on the far left, Donna Cundy, Chris Burmer, Zoe Zanadakis. I'm not sure quite where and how that was taken, but I think that's the, I don't know if it's the Mary Day. Mary Day is usually white, but it might have been darker at that particular time. But Buds Hawkins, Captain Haviland Hawkins, used to come to Monhegan all the time, and he had his own mooring right there by Dead Man's Cove. And I think the Hardy boat now has that particular mooring. But in any event, there we all are. So here is an event that took place when we first arrived on the island. We were stunned. I mean, we're really quite stunned by the way that many of our students spoke about the people on Matinicus Island. They would often say, oh, you got to be careful about those people over on Matinicus. They're not a good lot. You know, they fish off our backside. They're just not a good, trusting people. So I said, have you ever met any of those people? And they said, oh, no. But we know that they're that way. So we realized that we had a little serious problem here, and we decided to nip this problem in the bud. And so we wrote over to Gene Tapley, who was the not minister, but the teacher in the Matinicus school. And we said, Gene, we have a little problem over here about people offering disparaging comments about Matinicus, and maybe you have the exact same problem of Matinicus towards Monhegan. So we have an idea, and that is quite simply, would you be willing to have all of your children, and I think Matinicus had about 10 or 11 students at that time, in all grades, kindergarten to 8th grade, but would you be willing to write letters to all of our students? And here are all of our students, here's their grade and age, and maybe they could write pen pal letters to us. She thought it was a great idea, and she did. She sent the letters over, and when those letters arrived, it was just the best experience ever. We read every single one of them aloud, and each person took on a pen pal relationship with the students there from Matinicus. And the culmination of it all was that in the spring of the year, it was April of '74, Stan Haskell arranged for all of the Matinicus kids to come on the Sunbeam over to Monhegan. And we just had the best time ever. We played games. We had a dance, I think, on one of the evenings. We had treasure hunts, and the students all stayed in their pen pal houses. And it was just a fantastic time. And then the following year, we all went to Matinicus. So it was just a very wonderful and lovely event, and hopefully solidifying better relations between Matinicus and Monhegan itself. And probably one of the things I was very proud of was that I think it was at Kelly's wedding. She was pen pals with Ellen Bunker. And Ellen Bunker, because they had become such good friends, was her maid of honor at her wedding. So I thought, what a very beautiful testimony between the two islands that they could become good friends in that kind of way. So it was a very special time. But we also took a number of different trips when we were in the school. We went, for example, to Mount Katahdin. We stayed there for, I think, 3 days. It rained 2 of the 3 days. And I remember the ranger coming to us, and he had a great compassion upon us because we had come all the way from an island to visit Mount Katahdin. I think it was probably around May or something, but it did rain that time. And he said, well, let me show you some things. Maybe you'd be interested in seeing some deer. And all the kids said, oh, no, we don't want to see any deer. We have them every single day. They said, we'd like to see some squirrels and chipmunks. So it was kind of interesting that way of how they responded to the ranger there. And I do remember quite vividly, poor Timmy Burmer in the first night, because we just camped out at Roaring Brook there at Mount Katahdin, and we were all in tents, and Timmy's sleeping bag got totally soaked. And he came to my tent all kind of crying and said, Mr. Ives, my bag is all soaked. I'm not sure what to do. I said, well, Timmy, you take my sleeping bag and I'll take yours. So I slept in Timmy's sleeping bag for 2 nights in his wet sleeping bag. And I'm afraid I think I got a touch of pneumonia a while after that. But anyway, there were all kinds of wonderful situations that did arise. And I also remember we went to a camp called Bryant Pond. It was a nature camp over in the western part of the state, and we went over there for a couple of days. And it was a great experience. And the best thing I think about it, I'm not sure how many of you remember this, but it was a place for about 50 individuals, but we were the only school group that was at Bryant Pond Camp. So we stayed in their little dormitory, which had only bunk beds in it. And I remember every one of the students, all 13, we had 14 students, I think, at that particular point, but all 14 wanted to stay on the top bunk of all these beds. So we said, that's fine, that would be great. So after the story, Ruth always would read stories to all the children on a regular basis. We began every school day with reading stories, and often if there were times of disruption or difficulty, Ruth would just get a book out and she would read stories, and everyone would come hunker down that way. But just before everyone went to bed, she read her stories, and then everyone went to bed. Well, about 5 minutes later, after really everyone was sound asleep, suddenly I heard boom. Well, I think it was Lance Burton had fallen right out of bed. None of them had bunk beds. But anyway, Lance had rolling right off. He didn't even wake up. I just took him and threw him back up on the bunk. And another 2 minutes later, boom. I think it was Timmy who fell out also on the floor. So I threw him back up. He was a little bit kind of dazed by it, but nevertheless, I threw him back up there. And then I put pillows around everyone's bed, and everyone had a good night's sleep. So they're all the adventures of the environmental camp, but the personal adventures are even more memorable, at least to me. And in fact, I don't know if Louise is in here, but at Bryant Pond, I don't know if you remember, but we went down to a bog. And the naturalist who was showing us about all the natural scenes around the Bryant Pond area, as we are near this bog, Louisa got stung by a bee. She had no idea that she was very deadly allergic to bee stings. I could see her whole face just turning white and kind of an ashen gray. And then suddenly she got a little woozy, and I just lifted her up and grabbed her, and we all rushed back to the campground. It was about a half a mile away. And we actually rushed her, I think, to it was Stevens Memorial Hospital in Norway, but it was there that she was taken care of and was given an EpiPen. And in any event, again, another very memorable event. I'm not sure how many of you remember it, but I remember it very, very vividly. So we did have many different types of trips and activities. And this was one, I think we took a half a day off to have and to watch this bell being delivered to where it is now. It, of course, was over on Manana Island. That's the original fog signal station. And this is the original fog signal that was given off from about the 1850s for about 10 years until they had a steam-driven siren, and then eventually it was electrified. But here's the original kind of fog signal. And the Coast Guard decided to give it to the museum. And so a helicopter came in. I think Bob Booty was in charge of the whole arrangement, and they flew it in the helicopter over there. So we had a special time watching this come down. Again, I'm not sure how many of you remember it, but it was a very memorable event in my mind. And in fact, this is where Jim took place. Jim was always on the other side of the, again, Lighthouse Museum. That was our field for soccer or for a kickball and all the other types of activities we used to do. Let's see here. So on the island were such wonderful people and such memorable characters. And this, of course, is Charlie Murphy, Gramps Murphy. I think Charlie was about 98 when he was there on the island when we were there in 1973. I think he lived to be about 102 or 3. But in any event, Charlie Murphy has the distinction of being the first person to have license number 1, lobster license number 1. He, of course, had come from Friendship. He's Frida Stanley's father. Frida marries, of course, Dwight, but this is Frida's father-in-law, and Frida's father. And Charlie Murphy fished out of Friendship for a long time. And apparently around 1901, there may be facts that I'm getting a little bit inaccurate, but I think around 1901, the state of Maine decided that all lobstermen had to get a license. Well, you can imagine what kind of outcry that was among the fishermen, but nevertheless, Charlie Murphy had heard that. One day he was going up for some supplies in Rockland, and I don't know what it was called, whether it was the Department of Fisheries or Marine Life or whatever it was. He knew where the building was. He stopped in and said, "Oh, here, you have to get a license to actually go lobstering nowadays." They said, "Yep, it's brand new." He said, "Well, give me a license then." And they gave him lobster license number 1. Well, apparently Charlie went about 30 years fishing with that license, but then went on to be a shepherd over on Harbor Island in Muscongas Bay. And he did shepherding for about 3 years. But then he turned back to lobstering and had to renew his license. He went again to Rockland to get his renewed license. And when he renewed it, they gave him, I don't know what it was, but something like lobster license 9,653. And Charlie said, no, I'm number 1. I have number 1. They said, "Oh, no, you lost it. It lapsed. And we've given it to some other fisherman. But anyways, we'll give you this new license, 9,000. Charlie said, "Look, all my traps are branded with number 1. All my buoys are branded with number 1. I need to have number 1. So they talked it over and they gave him 1A. So Charlie was the first with number 1 and the first with a letter behind his actual number in that kind of way. So I always love it when I see Shermie's or Sherm's boat come in and we repair it, the Monhegan skiffs they had, but it always still has 1A on it. So it's been in the family for now, I think 4 or 5 generations, a very wonderful situation. And there, of course, are very beloved individuals, Harry Odom. and Doug Odom. This isn't Doug. This is, of course, Vernon Burton. But of course, Harry and Doug ran the store forever, over 50 years, I'm sure. But it was 10 years before we arrived that, of course, the store burned. It burned, I think it was in November, about 1 week before John Kennedy was shot, but it burned in November of 1963. But it burned a couple of the houses nearby. And of course, the population of the island back in 1963, during that winter, it went down to 25 or 30 people. And most people thought the island might disband and no longer be a year-round island. But nevertheless, because of the help and the kindness of summer people and many individuals helping Doug and Harry, it was rebuilt and became the wonderful store that it always was, at least in my generation, that way. And of course, there's a very, very familiar figure who was, always around the island when we were there on the island. But Ray Phillips, of course, was born and raised in Medway, Maine, and then went on to the University of Maine. And of course, during World War I, which he fought in, many people said that he might have been gassed during that particular time. And that's why Ray was a little different and had a very unusual kind of take on life. But nevertheless, Ray, of course, first came there in the 1930s, early 1930s. But it's interesting because Ray bought a boat in, I think, Cape Cod and sailed it, not to Monhegan. He spent the first summer in New Harbor. He spent much of the summer in New Harbor and was always asking the fishermen, many of the ones, older ones around here would tell me, he would always ask, what's that island off there? What's that island off there? And they'd say, oh, Monhegan Island. And the next year he came and spent a little time in New Harbor, but that's when he sailed out to Monhegan Island and he dropped anchor right where that lobster boat is and began to build that little hovel of a house. Looks like kind of an amazing array of different houses, but it was that building or buildings that he built himself out of driftwood or any wood he could scavenge anywhere he was able to do it. So Ray was such a wonderful figure and an interesting figure. Of course, there he is with all his 33, 34 different sheep that way. But of course, Ray would come over to the island about once a week to buy his groceries and to get his mail. And but it was, of course, I think it was around March, the end of March, when he had come ashore to the island, Monhegan, and was going back over to Manana. He was getting out and, of course, slipped. And he was about 84 or 5 at that time. He slipped and went into the water and got out, but he couldn't quite get out. His feet were kind of stuck in the water and was lapping on him. And I think Karen Winkapaw saw him. Someone saw him and maybe radioed out to Carl, because I think it was Carl Winkapaw who got him out of the water and brought him up to his house and got him settled away. But of course, that was the beginning of the demise of Ray. And he got sicker and sicker, probably had pneumonia of some sort. I remember going over with Dr. Rothstein, and we tried to persuade him to come back to the island to kind of get better and to kind of get over his illness, but he would have no part of it whatsoever. And he just said, no, I'll be fine. Don't you worry. I'll be fine. And he said, and I'll tell you how I am fine. What I'll do is I'll put a little light in the window. I'll light a kerosene lamp, and I'll put it every afternoon as it gets dark. I'll put it in the window. So if you see the light come on, you'll know that all's well with Ray and all is well with Manana Island. So for, I guess, probably about a week, 10 days or so, it came on every single evening, but then the light didn't come on, and we realized that Ray had died. One of the Coast Guard people found him there. So we did have a service for Ray shortly thereafter. People came from all over. The church was just packed out to celebrate Ray's very lovely service and honor him in that type of way. But I think that one of the best testaments to Ray that was ever given was this picture right here by Jamie. Of course, Jamie Wyeth painted this, and it's a picture called The Islander. And it's really a testament, I think, really a symbolic testament to Ray, because as he painted Ray's again, old Ram there. He painted with such dignity and honor and integrity. And I think that's the way we all felt about Ray. He was such a unique and man of integrity and dignity, and living that very solitary and intriguing life there on Manana Island itself. So we've kept contact with so many different individuals and keep coming back, sometimes sadly for a funeral or joyously for a wedding. But Lisa Brackett has always been a very beloved individual and a very beloved friend. And it's always a joy always to see Lisa on the island. And we do continue to come back from time to time, as often as we possibly can. But we've stayed in touch with the island through different kinds of situations. But back in 1979, when we began the boat shop, Ronnie Stanley called me and he said, I hear you're boat building. He said, I can't build any more boats at all. I've gone blind, basically speaking, and my diabetes has gotten the better of me. Would you ever consider making the skiffs for the fishermen out here? I said, Ronnie, my gosh, that would be such an honor. We would be thrilled to do that. And so I went out to the island and I got Ronnie's bevel board. I don't know if you know what a bevel board is, but it's all the angles and all of the different dimensions of a boat. He gave me some of the plans that he used to use and some of the tools. And so I took them away, and we've now been building skiffs for the Monhegan fishermen for now 43 years. So it's always been a special honor and a tribute to be able to do that kind of thing. We love doing it. But the situation is that we not just build the boats for the Monhegan fishermen, but we build skiffs for we've made over the years at least 200 to 250 Monhegan skiffs. So they literally are all over the country. So the wonderful talents of Will Stanley, when he designed that wonderful boat around probably about 1900, 1905, somewhere in that time frame. That little boat has traveled America in many different ways. At the boat shop, we, of course, make all different kinds of boat, not just Monhegan skiffs, but we also build, let's see here, pea pods like this. In fact, this was the very first pea pod I built over on Louds Island. But at the boat shop, we make Rangeley Lake boats or lovely little sailboats, Adirondack guide boats, little sailing dinghies, pea pods, but always the entry-level boat that we build for all the apprentices. They all have to build a Monhegan Island skiff in pairs or in trios that way. So that's the standard one. And we always have them build it. And after they build it in about a week to 10 days, then they're graded for the work that they do on the boat. We make everyone launch the boats, and whoever's built it has to sit in it. And if the boat actually it launches with no water coming into it, they pass the test. If the boat sinks, they don't pass. So it's a pass-fail arrangement with everyone. So again, the skiffs are still being produced on a regular basis. But not only do we stay in touch, again, by building skiffs, we also have stayed in touch by working at the church, not just through church services. I think I've spent about 25 summers coming out there, but the apprentices have painted their way around the church 3 different times. We've often brought out apprentices and other different types of groups, and they kind of paint one side at a time, but we've painted our way around the church at least 3 full times. And also, this is the site of a very wonderful kind of event in our lives, a tragedy in some, but nevertheless a wonderful event in our lives. And that, of course, was that in 1988 or 1989, I can't quite remember. But in any event, the Coast Guard was still out on Manana being manned there. But on the winter evening, and sometime in February, when it was sub-zero temperatures and blowing like stink, the Coast Guardmen on the island got a call from the Coast Guard station in Booth Bay Harbor. And it came in at about, I think, 2 o'clock in the morning. And the Coast Guard people in Booth Bay Harbor said that they had learned that the light was out on Monhegan, that they had to go over immediately and get the light going. So the 2 Coast Guard men got their foul weather gear on, went down to the boathouse, jumped in the pea pod that you see there, pulled the lever and started down the gangway there. But suddenly, the bow line apparently fouled around a bollard of some sort, and it flipped the Peapod right over, casting these two Coast Guard men into the water. And before they even knew what hit them, they had drifted away from the actual Manana Island and had drifted over towards Smutty Nose. They were able to kind of crawl up onto Smutty Nose, but as they came out of the water, they were quite literally freezing to death. They got up on the island. One of them had a VHF radio, a waterproof VHF radio. They radioed to the Coast Guard station Boothby Harbor and shouted, "We're dying, we're dying. We're freezing to death right now. Get help out here immediately." Well, Boothby Harbor realized they couldn't do any help whatsoever. It'd be too, much time to be able to save their lives. They quickly called Sherm Stanley. Sherm said he would do whatever he could. And Sherm, I think, woke up Steve Rollins. They went down to the shore, tried to launch one of the skiffs, but apparently the waves were too high and they just couldn't get it off the actual shore. Steve had remembered a dory behind, I think, Brian Hitchcock's or someone's fish house. They grabbed and went up and dragged this 18-foot dory down and launched the dory. Took them about 15 minutes to row over to Smutty Nose. They found one of the people had collapsed, but they got him into the boat, and in doing so, brought him back to Monhegan itself and saved the two Coast Guard men's lives. It was a remarkable feat, an amazing act of heroism. The award that the Coast Guard gives out, the highest award they ever give out, is the Silver Star Award. And indeed, Steve Rollins and Sherm were given that award, I think, in the spring of that year down in Washington, D.C. And they, again, were given that Silver Star Award for personal bravery and heroism in saving those two men's lives. So why do I share this story? Well, I share it simply because that dory that they used to rescue those men's lives was built at the Carpenter's boat shop. So again, I share it because I share that really actually with every apprentice class. And I always tell them that when you build these boats, make sure you build them with great skill and great care and great talent, because these boats might someday have to save a person's life. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about those kinds of stories. And indeed, we still stay in touch. As Jen mentioned, that was the Fitzgerald dory that we totally rebuilt with apprentices last spring. It was just a great event, and it was a very special project. So, Chris, I think you'd be very pleased to see that your dory's in pretty good shape at this particular time. But again, I just love Monhegan Island. It's been, again, such an important part of my life that I share every single year. We always take all the apprentices out to Monhegan to show them the beauty and the inspiration and the sanctuary that Monhegan has always been. So it still remains that in my life and always will be. So that's my little talk at this particular point. And I think if you have any questions or how you would like to do that, let me stop sharing here and get back on. So
can you find
Jen,
yourself, Bobby?
Let me see here. I'll cancel that. Oh,
So are you there?
I'm
Can you
right
see
here.
yourself? All right. Before we open it up to everyone, I do have, because I think that there are going to be a lot of very personal questions. I see Tim Bermer there ready to go. There were a couple of kind of general questions that people, or not general, but questions that people emailed us beforehand that I wanted to ask. A couple of them are from former students of mine who had a very different experience, I think, than your students. And so one of the questions was, with 14 kids in one room with all of those ages, the most students I had was 11, and that was a lot. How did kids have their own desks? Did you use tables? Were there, how did you orient the classroom to accommodate all of those kids and all those ages?
Mandy, that's a good question. Well, first of all, Ruth and I divided the school. Again, we had 14 children. And I taught kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and seventh and eighth grade. And Ruth taught the muddy middle, all the ones in the middle. And that's how we kind of divided it that way. But the days began, correct me if I'm wrong, Timmy and Chris and Lisa and Donna, but Zoe, I think you're there also, but we used to always begin the day with reading. Ruth would always read stories, and we would do that maybe for half an hour or so and have a continuous story kind of going on. We had all different kinds of magazines, Ranger Rick and that type of thing. But we always began with stories, and then we individualized all of the classes so that, again, I would get the kindergarten going, and then the first grade going, and then the second, and then Chris Bermer. Chris was my special student, and not special by any means. I would get Chris going. And when Chris was finished with his work, I would have him go down and help out with the first graders or this, that kind of thing. So everyone was kind of helping one another, and Ruth would do the same. So it was all individual attention in the morning with reading and English and mathematics. And then in the afternoon, we had general subjects. So we would kind of gear it towards fourth or fifth grade in general, and the younger ones would have to kind of learn. But we had social studies, we had Maine history. Ricky Bermer would come in and do a Spanish class. We had shop class, we had gym once a week also. So we had all the general classes in the afternoon, but that's how we kind of arranged the school. And yes, everyone had his own personal individual desk. And they kind of decorated them in different kinds of ways, but that was basically how we kind of dealt with it. I remember that the awkwardness was that when we first arrived, the plumbing wasn't very good. Of course, we had a toilet called a destroylet. I don't know if any of you are familiar with destroylets, but it should have been destroyed a long time ever before we started using it because it was just dreadful. And I remember, again, I think it was Louisa who, sadly, I mean, what it was, you would do your, defecate and urinate, but then you would pull a lever and it would start a gas burner and would actually burn up all of the residue there. Well, sometimes people would go in too soon, and I think Louisa burned her bottom, and I just complained to the actual school board. I said, this is just not working at all. So we actually just put in a simple porta potty for the toilet right there. Was on inside closet. So that was our little bathroom facility. And it was the job of one of the individuals always to dump that porta potty off of, I think it was the Bates cottage or one of the cottages there. They would dump it off the porch. And in fact, I got nailed very severely in the sense that in the spring of the year, again, they would just dump it off the porch into the ocean. That was the way we did it back in the 50s or the 70s. But in any event, I remember, I think it was maybe Courtney or someone was dumping it off the porch, but the people had actually arrived a little early. So they saw him dumping it off their deck into the ocean and just reprimanded him badly. And Courtney said, I think something to the effect of, well, Mr. Ives told me to do it this way. So again, we had to kind of promote good peace relations between summer and winter, different people. And also, I must say also, the students had to lug their own water. We always, I think we used the Nelson's well there, but we would lug the water there for our drinking water and the water we needed. And it worked out really well. And in fact, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but on my parting exit with the school board, they were asking if we should do something. Well, I'd heard that they were going to be putting in running water in the schoolhouse. And I said to him, I understand that you're thinking of actually putting in running water in the school. And they said, oh, absolutely. We would like to modernize as much as possible. And I said to him, well, my parting comment to you is don't do it. you should never put in running water in that Monhegan Island school, because you would deprive those students of carrying their actual water, which they therefore, when they go off into life, will appreciate every ounce of water. They'll appreciate it dearly for the rest of their lives, having lugged it during their days on Monhegan itself. And indeed, I don't think they put in running water for another 5 or 6 years, but I think they finally broke down and did it. But that was my parting recommendation to the school board after we left that way. So there you be.
Well, I appreciated having running water as a teacher, though the lesson that life lesson, I think, is a good one.
Let me share one thing too. Again,
Yes.
we just had that little heater there. It was a small, again, kerosene burning heater, and twice it froze up. The line, there was condensation in the line because it was so cold out. So the line froze. And the first time it froze, we started therefore, because the school was like 20 degrees. It was amazing. All the paint froze and everything froze. So I started everything with Jim. We all did push-ups and sit-ups and everything to kind of warm up. But then finally the school board stepped in and said, no, they've got to go home. And indeed, and it did, I think twice it froze up that way. So we had absentee school at that juncture.
That's interesting because that happened to me during my time. There had never been any snow days, and the wind was coming just so that it froze up the exhaust line. And we had a backup heater, but of course, anything exiting out was freezing. And so it was about 45 degrees inside the school. The kids had their and Lucas was there, Jen's husband, trying to get things warmed up and working, but he just couldn't keep them. They had an automatic shutoff for safety because the fumes would then be coming back into the school. But we tried. So that was our only almost snow day. And so the students got to go home after snack in the morning.
Mandy, did you have a truant officer?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because we had Harry T-Bone as our truant officer, and I had to utilize him 3 different times because Greg and Heidi Booty would often come, they were the kindergartners, and they would often come to school together. And I would start the school, I'd ring the school bell to get everyone there. And I always remember seeing Greg and Heidi coming along the roadway, and sometimes they were holding hands, but inevitably, even though they were heading there, sometimes they would veer off and go down to the ice pond or different kinds of places. And occasionally they wouldn't show up for like a half an hour, 40 minutes. So I'd go over to Harry T-Bone's house and say, Harry, I got a job for you. Go look for Greg and Heidi. And so he was always helping me out, finding all the truant students at that point.
That we have a lot of similar experiences, because the only student that disappeared on me was a kindergartner as well, who I had to go and find. I actually didn't have to find the truant officer, who was Billy Boynton, but I was able to track the student down. But yeah, I think at this point you have answered many of the questions that came in advance. It was really compelling. Thank you so much. And I think at this point, I'm going to open it up. I think there are lots of people that are here that want to talk to you directly. So I think if everyone wants to turn on their videos again, Tim has already done it. I see Chris has raised his hand. Tim and Chris, who wants to go first?
Mr. Ives, I just want to, I don't know how active you are on social media, and I just wanted to share something that Lance had written about you that it was interesting. It was just one of those things that there are many things in life that happen in life and we're all aware of it, but until somebody actually spells it out for you, you don't realize the significance of it. And I thought it was wonderful how Lance had described you as, obviously his teacher, his reverend, his friend and mentor and all this, but also that you had married him and that you had also continued to baptize his children, which was that's really cool. Anyway, that's all I have to. It's great to see all you guys.
Timmy, let me just say, one of the greatest honors of my life is that of the 14 children in that schoolhouse, I've married 9 of you over the years. So it's been a special honor.
Well, speaking for my brother and I, if you married us each one of our weddings, our numbers would have gone way up.
Chris, did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, thank you, Mr. Ives. It was great hearing these stories. Some of them, I didn't know about the Steve Rollins and Sherm Stanley story. That's really remarkable.
Yeah,
But
it was amazing. Yeah.
just to add a little bit to something you said, I don't know if I met later on in life David Ames, who was my pen pal in Metenicus. We became friends, and it was so cool to say, I always thought you had a pointed head. He goes, yeah, I thought you guys didn't have any teeth, and we became pretty good friends over that, and it was pretty neat. But I just wanted to say that when I think and tell people about the life that I think probably all of us had, it was a very magical and special time. Almost, I describe it because I don't know a better way of like Tom Sawyerish, but it was just unique. And I'm very grateful for the whole experience of growing up on a small community in a one-room schoolhouse with the close friends that I have. They're all really family members. All the kids I went to school, they're like as close as brothers and sisters you could ever have. And you and Ruth were amazing. And thank you for, and I just can't imagine anybody having it as well as we did. So thank you very much, Mr. Ives. It was, thank you for putting up with me too. I'm glad you didn't tell me Chris stories. I was cringing. I'll leave it to my brother for that.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. Again, it was, for me, it was a transformational kind of experience. And it set me, everything I've done really begins, its origins are in that one-room schoolhouse and the island itself. I have never parted really from what we did there. The beginning of the boat shop is because I always admired Ronnie Stanley building those boats and the people using all those boats. I fell in love with boats and boat building and everything. And again, teaching in the boat shop for all the apprentices, the 10 apprentices there, was like teaching in the one-room schoolhouse. I would get one boat going and then I'd get another boat going. And it was that family experience, which was so fundamental and helpful to, I think, all of us in the Monhegan school, but also for all the apprentices who we have dealt with now for those, again, 34 years or 44 years at the boat shop. So we're really just a big family together.
Lisa or Zoe, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for doing this. And Bobby, your stories are so wonderful. And it's really cool to see all the people that, have tuned in. Courtney's here cooking dinner. Anyway, everybody. And I'm really looking forward to hoping everybody can get together June 10th. I'm going to get in contact. I talked to Marianne tonight with Heidi and Heather Booty. And yeah, I'm just so excited and just happy to see you all, even if it's on this virtual thingamajiggy here. Anyway, I'm not too good at this. Good to see you, Bobby. Thank you.
It's always wonderful to see you, and we look forward to our 50th reunion. It'll be a very special time, and we'll all be on the island together and renew our wonderful experiences.
I think it was probably a good thing that we waited, because 50th sounds better than 49, right? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Good.
Love you all.
I'll just share one thing. The time when we first started, we weren't sure quite what people would make of us, or whether they would like us or not, and we're a little bit at odds. And I remember one day when I finally realized that people might actually like us there on the island, because people were very quiet and kind of subdued about things. But I remember coming home. It was probably about an October day. We never carried flashlights. We just kind of walked around in the dark. We had them available. But I remember coming up to the Bessie Green house. It was pitch dark. After school, we would go to the store and buy food and then come on back. But it was pitch dark. And I remember reaching the doorknob of the Bessie Green house. And as I reached onto the doorknob, suddenly I recoiled quickly and I couldn't figure out what on earth was on the doorknob. Well, I got my flashlight out and shined it on the doorknob, and there was about a 3.5 to 4 foot cusk. And I thought, oh my gosh, they don't like us. They're putting old fish on our doorknob, so they don't like us. But I went down the next day and I saw, I think it was probably Harry Odom. And I said, Harry, there was a fish on our doorknob and I don't know what to make of it. He says, make of it? That's the biggest honor you could ever have when someone gives you a cusk in that way. And so we had chowder forever and it was just wonderful. But it was the first time I realized, oh, they actually might really like us there on the island. Anyway, I'm not sure whether people are, Jen, are you still there?
Yeah. If
Okay.
you go into your up to the right hand corner where it says view, and if you hit gallery view, you should be able to see everyone.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. How lovely. Lovely. Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you. It's just been such an honor and a very special privilege to be able to share some of these stories that will live very vividly in my mind forever, I assure you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Bobby,
I just want to say thank you.
Bobby, this is Mary Kordak. I just want to thank you for
Mary.
the lovely October and May times my husband John and I spent with you and Ruth having dinner, trying to stay warm by your fireplace, the Green Cottage. It was a magical time for us too. Thank you so much.
Well, Mary, thank you so much. Lovely to hear you and see you.
Now, Lisa, it looked like you had something you were.
Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you, Mr. Ives, for being here and doing this. And it's just so great to see everybody. And I was texting with Courtney. I'm like, if I let one tear fall, I will completely lose it. I'm like, I'm just so grateful. What an amazing, there we go. Just life we had. And thank you so much to you and Ruth for blessing us and beyond the beyond. I mean, we've just brought you forward with us and know so many things. And like, you know, you're whatever whenever I see a Highland cattle, I'm like, that's Bobby, his favorite animal. I'm like, why do we know these things?
Oh,
And just,
well,
just
of course,
so much.
Ruth and I had come from Scotland. I mean, not that we were from Scotland originally, but I had spent 3 years there. So living in the Bessie greenhouse, walking down towards the school every day and seeing raised sheep out there on Manana Island, I felt like I was in Scotland or in Brigadoon. It was just a very wonderful experience. And Lisa, of course, it was your mom, Sandy, who, when I first came out to interview, Ruth didn't come out at that point. She was, I think, teaching school. I had come across from Scotland to be with her. And so I came out alone to interview, and then she came out a little bit later. But I stayed at your house. It was a very special time. And again, it kind of was a wonderful welcoming to the whole island, staying with your mom.
I just want to say, as a teacher, you know, very often you plant seeds and you hope that you have made an impact. And it must just feel so wonderful to you, Bobby, to see all of these faces and to get this feedback that the love and the care that you put into your time there reaped so many benefits for not just you and Ruth, but for all of the children that you taught. That's really amazing. What an amazing legacy.
Mandy, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
in some of our cases, Bobby had to pull weeds out. It wasn't so much planting seeds, it was making sure we didn't go too far astray. But thank you very much, Mr. Ives. I can speak for all of us that we're much better people because of you. And I can't believe what life would be like without, look at the pictures here. Kathy, Courtney, Lisa, I know Donna's here, my brother, there's others here that I can't see right now because they're further down. Zoe. We learned community. I mean, I guess we had to, and I think we still search for that, and it was a pretty special place. So thank you. There's no words.
Chris, let me just share another personal story, and that is, as you remember, we used to come every Friday, but we would stop, of course, from time to time at your house. And one of the things that always impressed me so much was that your dear mom would, of course, read after every meal. They always had those wonderful stories, and I just love hearing those stories. And that was a concept that in every single meal at the boat shop for those 40 years, we would read at every meal. We always called it food for the body and food for the soul. But that reading is just so important, and sharing all different kinds of stories, from mythical stories to biblical stories to just children's stories, just all those wonderful stories that are so important as you go through life, to be able to equip yourself with kindness and dignity and love and forgiveness. So I thank your mom especially. I still miss her terribly, and give my very, very best to your dad.
Thank you, Bobby.
And
This has been
Ives,
amazing.
I remember, you mentioned that Ruth used to read to, we would have story time right after lunch break. I remember we had a long lunch break. It was 11:30 to 1, so that we could all go home and have lunch and get back. And I just remember gathering around and that just kind of settled us all down, because we'd all been running around like little wild things. And I still come across books. The Hobbit. We read. That was how I heard The Hobbit. We would all come in and just be so excited to hear what was going to happen, to Frodo and Bilbo, and so even now, when when people mention Tolkien or whatever, it immediately transports me back to that, which is just wonderful.
I remember some of the favorites were also Ben of Old Monhegan and Marjorie of Monhegan, Sidney Baldwin's very stories. So it was very special. And in fact, we used to write to Sidney Baldwin about them. She was very impressed that we were reading them on the island. So it was great.
Mr. Ives, you I don't know if you remember, but we used to have show and tell. And being the lower end of the spectrum, you'd have us all in a semicircle around the chalkboard, and you would have us all show and tell something or whatever. And I remember that was very educational for somebody on the lower end of the grades for me. But one thing, I'm wondering if anybody else remembers this. I remember, obviously I was in first and second grade with you, and I was looking up, and you're like this mythical figure teaching us, but you've got this piece of chalk in your hand, and you told us two things that I'll never forget. One was you started teaching us some song about that your girl was a corker because she was a New Yorker, and you started drawing this picture, and and as the silly song kept getting, this picture got bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know, am I the only one that remembers it?
Oh dear. Well, I do remember many of those things, but what I especially remember is having so many people come into the school. Remember, Tom Martin used to come in, and Tom would give us all kinds of talks about ornithology and birds. And, he had that wonderful talk about a second look. I remember him again giving that beautiful, he would show a picture on the screen, and everyone would ooh and ah because it was like a jewel. And then he would back the camera up, and it would show it again, and they would ooh and ah, and then he'd finally back it up, and it was just simply a dandelion. But he always kind of reinforced really looking hard at what reality really is and how it begins in that way. So Tom Martin and so many people who would come in, even Ted Edison came in and talked to us about his work at Princeton University.
I remember you were you were probably working through vowels with us and consonants and all this sort of stuff on the board, but you were telling us that we could only become a member of the secret society if we could pronounce this special word of yours, and you're writing it all out, and it was like Owa, we don't say Owa, he said Tago, Siam or whatever, and then when we said it quickly, you're saying, oh, what a goose I am. We were all very impressed with that.
Forgive me, Timmy. I'm so sorry.
Well,
I do remember playing pond hockey, though, Chris, with you on the pond, or with everyone that way. But it was a wonderful time playing pond hockey on the ice pond to get all the kind of frustrations out and all the emotions out. It was just a great, very fun time. That was part of gym.
Hey, why do you mention my name in frustrations anyway?
You are an outstanding student, Chris, and always will be.
Something that I find interesting, Bobby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say something that I find really interesting is listening to you talk. You know, I came into the Monhegan School in 2015, and we did many of the same things. You know, we had recess on the sliding rock, and we went up behind the lighthouse to do gym. And we, you know, did hockey and skating and booting and all of that stuff on the ice pond when it was frozen. And that was like a ritual that we would do. We would go and take a walk to check the ice, you know, to test when it would be ready. And it sounds like a lot of the same traditions that were happening when you were there have continued on. And your structure too. I did the same thing. I did morning meeting in the morning, and then instead of reading in the morning, we would do mindfulness and yoga, and then we'd go into that same kind of math and individualized lessons. Yeah. Break, come back, silent sustained reading to let everyone come in, and then we do a read aloud to start our afternoon, which was social studies and science and art and music. So interestingly, the structure was so similar in my day as it was in yours. I find that really, really fascinating.
That is fascinating. The superintendent of schools, when we were there, was a man named Gilbert Strout. And Gilbert lived in Thomaston. I guess he was in the Madomic Valley area, but it was he who was the superintendent. And he would come out on the mailboat twice a year. I guess he had to. And he would always say to us he'd say, I've got to read you all the rules and regulations. And so he would read all the rules and regulations. But he said, you know, just do whatever you think is best. So he was very thoughtful about the whole process and the unique situation that we had. And so it was nice to kind of get his vote of confidence to be able to do what we felt was best for you all.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ives. I love that your students, after 50 years, still call you Mr. Ives. And I can't wait to hear what comes out of that time capsule in June.
Yeah. Well, Jen, thank you so much. Mandy, thank you so much. And it's just such an honor to see all your wonderful faces. And we'll renew it all in June when we have our 50th formal reunion and open that time capsule. So blessings on you all. And thank you so much for coming.